And,
Right.
okay. Just making sure. And so,
I thought what we could do to kind of open this up is um, talk about uh, Good evening and welcome to Decision 2019, a night that we think is the last night of the election cycle.
Yes.
Mark Johnson alongside Dr. Stephanie Witt, Boise State political science professor. That is just one of her many titles that she holds at BSU. It's a business card too long to list. Coming up here in the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to kind of run down what this election is all about. An election that consists of 2 ballots and 2 races on each of those ballots in 2 Treasure Valley cities, Caldwell for a city council and Boise for the mayor's race. We're going to talk about that more in just a moment. Our Joe Paris is overmanning the big board as he loves to do on election night every single year. Joe, when do you think the numbers are going to start coming in? You talked to Clerk McGrain today. What did he say?
Well, we're going to start expecting some of those mail-in ballots that were processed earlier today. The results have been tallied. We're just waiting for them to be published. Those could really get out here in the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. So we're going to start actually seeing these results roll into our newsroom here. And what we're looking at is going to be this area of the screen. That's going to be the results here tonight. We'll be following precinct by precinct for you. You can see here in the orange, those are all the great people in Boise that were able to go vote today. Of course, we'll also be talking about that Caldwell runoff for City Council Seat 6. Mark, we're just getting started here, but I'm expecting a lot of these results will start rolling in here shortly.
All right, Joe, we'll get back to you periodically in the next 45 minutes. Our Misty Inglett is manning the station there in Caldwell, where there was 1 voting place today. Everyone showed up there, and it was a very, very busy place. And our Joey Prechtel is in downtown Boise manning the numbers there at the Ada County election site. Okay, so Dr. Witt, let's talk about what many political science experts are saying is one of the most historically contested mayoral races in Boise City history. How do you frame this?
Well, I think it is unusual. First of all, we had a mayor who's been in the office for a long time, so we haven't seen a good contest for mayor in 16 years, right? Probably since
16 years ago, it was very close.
Yes, and before that, we had the Brent Coles versus Tracy Andrus election. That was highly contested.
Sure.
But we have to go back into, is it the late 40s to see the next, the last runoff? I think.
Right.
So decades anyway since we've used this mechanism, meaning that usually the mayor wins by a large margin over a majority, and we don't need it. Right. Suddenly, we had a field with many candidates, most of whom were viable on some level, and so it made it much harder for either one of them to win a clear majority.
I want to talk to you about this mechanism, your word that you used, which is really appropriate here. As a professor, how do you digest this and present this to students? A runoff situation. I don't know how many cities or states in the nation have runoff options, but I know it's not everyone.
Well, if I really were a political science expert, I'd probably know how many exactly. I don't. It's not that uncommon. There are states that use the runoff for gubernatorial races, require a majority. And there are a lot of cities that use this mechanism. So what I tell students is, first of all, not everybody is completely clear about the difference between a plurality and a majority. So we talk about in most of our elections in the United States, the person who wins is the person who gets 1 more vote than anyone else. Right? But when you have an office that by law or constitution requires a majority, then you have to get 50% plus 1. It's a little different.
Right. We were talking before we went on the air, the last runoff election in Boise was actually for a city council seat when Dave Eberly was able to, didn't get 50 plus 1 and had to go to a runoff, and he was so upset about it and the cost involved and the time involved, he helped kind of soldier the elimination of the runoff in the city council seat. Why do you think that didn't happen in the mayoral race?
Well, yeah, when I said decades back, I meant for the mayor, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between a city council member, one of several, versus the mayor. The mayor's the singular leader of the city, right? And I think the intent of this kind of a structure is you want to make sure that the person who governs the entire city has the support of at least half of the voters that
right.
vote. And in our system here in Boise, we have a strong mayor. They have a lot of budgetary power. They have a lot of appointment power to appoint all the heads of the departments with the council's consent. They develop the budget with their staff and work with council consent. So it's a strong mayor system. It's an important role in the state's largest city. So
right.
my sense is that we just want to make sure that whoever that is can say that at least half the voters wanted them in.
Right. Well, full disclosure, we will tell you that we are going wall to wall on these two ballots.
Yeah.
Because really, we felt like the storyline extends beyond those cities' limits.
Sure.
The storyline in Boise is about a 16-year incumbent mayor facing off against the city council president he appointed.
Yeah.
8 years. He is an experienced politician. He was a state representative. She's been at city council for 8 years, a long time Idahoan. And this really is the story of two completely different candidates, and the direction the capital city will go really depends on which one wins.
Well, yes, and I think some voters were concerned that there really isn't enough difference between the two, and so I would say that
wow.
I mean, McLean has been the council president with this mayor for a long time, right? So in some ways they represent some of the same policies, right? The election has really given them a chance to refine, here's exactly how I'm different from this other person.
The homelessness issue.
Yeah.
The baseball park.
Yep.
He wants that
Yes.
desperately. She doesn't.
Right.
The F-35s, he desperately wants that program
Yeah.
coming in,
Yeah.
and he has lobbied for that and been a cheerleader for that.
Yeah.
She wants to take a step back on that. So there's major differences.
There are. I think that this really started, the differentiation started when Lauren became the council president, and she decided to do a listening tour around all the neighborhood associations. And when she started listening to people, she started to hear the deep felt concerns, right, about things that I'm not sure are actually the mayor's fault, like how much housing costs and things like that. But she went around and listened and thought, I want to have a different way of approaching these things. That's my perception of what led her to say, even though I've been on this council for a long time, I'm going to take some different stands. So style-wise, they seem quite different to me. And she is, of course, by age younger and a little younger in terms of how many years she's held office. Maybe it's a fresh look, and I think some voters were just, she saw a younger, fresher voice that they wanted. She was ahead by at least 15 percentage points in the general election.
Really made a name for herself in this campaign, for
Yes.
sure, going door to door in those listening sessions, as you mentioned. I'm just going to talk to the booth for a second. When you guys tell me, give me the thumbs up sign when Joey or Misty are ready to go, we'll send it to them. In the meantime, let's shift gears and talk about what's going on in Caldwell. Here you've got John McGee, who has taken this broken road to try to get back into politics after being out for so long. And then you've got Evangeline Beechler, who did not win her bid to become a state representative on the Democratic ticket last year. You talk about two completely different candidates.
There are so many things that are interesting about that race. The candidates are such a contrast, kind of having tried to win in that same area in different races before, right, with the representative. McGee's personal story of making a comeback after having to leave office in disgrace. He's back. Would he be able to win the confidence? And then there's this hiccup about whether or not the city actually had a runoff requirement, right? And someone discovers that, oh my goodness, we've had this rule along and we didn't know. And so
he thought he could have fought it. Dave Leroy thought that he would have won that case. He said, no, we're going to go forward.
Well, I think it's good. It's a good stance for him. You don't want to seem to fight that. I think, especially given his history, he wants to be as open to winning it in a open and just way. But it goes to show, I think, that cities can make mistakes like anybody, and someone lost track of this rule, and we haven't been applying it all along. And here comes a race where, again, he won a plurality, but not the majority, so it triggered the runoff.
As Mr. Rogers once said, not everything is mistake-free in
yes,
the
this
neighborhood.
Is right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, we want to take you downtown to our Joey Prechtel. He joins us live at the Ada County Elections Office. What can you tell us? Is it buzzing down there yet, Joey?
Not quite yet, Mark. It's still pretty quiet as I look into this window here where they're going to start counting here pretty soon. I was able to just speak with the Ada County Clerk, Phil McGrain. He told me that right now all of the precincts across Boise are in shutdown mode. As we know, the polls closed about 12 minutes ago. So right now, all of those precinct workers, they're getting things together, they're getting things organized, and then they should have all of their ballots that they collected throughout the day here at headquarters sometime around 8:30. Now, what McGrain also told me was that the results from the early voting as well as the absentee ballots will be down soon. That's actually when he ended the conversation. He actually had to go into the back to actually look into that and make sure that was being taken care of. And so as we sit here, we're just kind of waiting to see as these results come in. Like, again, they're going to be here around 8:30 is when all of those people will start coming in. Results from early voting and absentee ballots are expected to come down soon. For early voting and absentee ballots, what Phil McGrain told me earlier in the night was that there was a little bit more than he and his office expected. They ended up getting about 12,000 votes total between the two of them combined. Of course, early voting was happening 2 weeks before tonight, and then the absentee ballots, those have been taken, throughout this entire runoff period. And again, looking in here, we're just seeing some of the precinct workers kind of, standing around, just kind of chit-chatting, waiting for this. As far as voter turnout for today, what McGrain told me was that it was kind of feast or famine. So some precincts were very busy. They had long lines. He said typically those precincts were north of State Street in the north end, but he said the rest of the city was pretty quiet. I mean, I can speak for myself. The precinct that I was at earlier this afternoon was also pretty quiet. So we're still waiting here, still waiting for that first round of results to see who is going to be the next mayor of Boise between the four-time incumbent Mayor Dave Beater or City Council President Lauren McLean. We're going to continue to monitor this closely, but for now, let's actually toss it out to Misty Inglett in Caldwell for that City Council runoff race happening out there. Misty?
Yeah, thanks, Joey. So we're actually kind of seeing the opposite story here in Caldwell that they're seeing in Boise. Now, we also don't have any results quite yet. They're hoping to see that first wave in about 15 minutes or so, around 8:30, to get some of those numbers. I don't know if you can hear in the background behind me, but they have started running some of those machines and just started putting some ballots through just a couple of minutes ago. Now, I want to get to the voter turnout portion in just a second because there is some interesting news with that as well. But first, I want to kind of sum up the race that we're looking at here. There's a lot of interesting pieces to this puzzle. So of course we've got Evangeline Beachler, who you mentioned a few moments ago was a former candidate for a state senator seat in 2018 but did not win that election. And then you have an actual former state senator, John McGee, who resigned from that position in 2012. Now, McGee's political history is no secret. He had accusations back then of sexual harassment as well as a DUI conviction just before that, and so he stepped down. Now, last November, we saw a three-way race between McGee, Beachler, and a third candidate for the city council seat, which is seat number 6, by the way. We saw 39% with McGee come out on top, Beachler right behind at about 31%. There was only a difference of about 200 votes there, so it was fairly close. Now, one of the key things with this race and why we're really talking a lot about this, we're out here doing coverage tonight, is really this is a race that shouldn't have been happening if not for the candidates that we're talking about. Because of McGee's past, when they saw that he had came out on top in November, a lot of people were upset. They contested it, felt that he didn't get the majority. 39% was not enough of the people's voice to say, yep, he's on city council. He's our next council member. So they asked to contest this, and this has really brought up the issue with Canyon County, the city of Caldwell, of what is the runoff policy. They didn't know before this that they actually had a policy in place for that because they've never had to use it. No other race has ever been contested until now. So the elections office did a lot of research with the Secretary of State, the AG's office, and found that indeed there is that loophole that talks about the runoff. So that's why we're here tonight. I was speaking with the county clerk earlier about this, and he said this is the first runoff since he's been clerk, so at least 9 years that they have had a runoff. And he tells me that the city of Caldwell is actually planning to amend its ordinance after this so that there are no future runoffs, because it's just too costly for them. So this has kind of set a precedence, at least for the city of Caldwell and for Canyon County, for future races. So those are a couple of interesting things about this. Now, I do want to talk about voter turnout here, because I know a lot of people, myself included, were not expecting a high turnout with this race, expecting probably lower than what they saw in November. And again, speaking with the clerk earlier, he said that the national average actually shows a 20% drop-off in voters from the original vote to a runoff. We are not seeing that here at all. They did tell me right as the polls closed what some of their numbers were. In November, they saw a total turnout between early voting, people coming to the polls. They saw just under 3,300 for total turnout. They have surpassed that tonight with voting for this runoff election. They had well over 1,000 people coming here and voting at the elections office today, and 2,100 early votes come in. So they beat the original vote, which was back on early November, of course, as you'll remember. So it's really interesting. You know, I know a lot of us, again, we're talking about that. I didn't expect to see those kinds of numbers, and they have a higher turnout here in Caldwell. Now, they only had the one polling place open, which was here at the elections office. They don't have to wait on any precincts to bring those numbers in. They're starting to count them behind me here, and so they are hoping to have those results fairly quickly, because they're not having to wait on any of those outlying precincts to bring those in. So for now, I'm going to send it back to Mark in the studio, and I'm going to go check in and see if we have any results.
Okay, Misty, good stuff. And as she alluded to, obviously the city of Caldwell wrestling with a number of issues that other cities in the Treasure Valley are, most notably property taxes and growth. And there's a lot of folks that right now are saying this seat really could tip the scale for those issues.
Yes, if that's correct, what she said, that the turnout is higher in the runoff than it was in the original.
That's incredible.
That is quite surprising.
Unheard of, right?
Right. When I was getting ready to, I was on my way home on Election Day, and I stopped at a convenience store, and the person in front of me was regaling the clerk about what she was mad about and why she voted the way that she was. And I thought, wow, even people just stopping at the convenience store, she had a long list of grievances, and she was going to take it out on the mayor,
Of course.
And so I think that there was a lot of that in the original election. Not all of it is controlled by the mayor, but the growth is getting uncomfortable, the prices of the housing is getting uncomfortable, the property taxes are coming up, traffic is up, those kinds of things that people think, these people have created this, we want to get rid of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get over to Joe. And Joe, Stephanie has an interesting number from
2015.
From 2015 about absentee ballots.
Yeah. Well, I just looked on the Ada County election site and noticed that in Boise City in 2015, there was about 6,700 absentee ballots were requested. And we're already, in the original election in November, we had 12,000. Yeah. And we haven't doubled in size, so we're seeing like a lot of increased interest in voting early or voting absentee. That struck me.
Yeah, that's telling.
In the Ada County Clerk, Phil McGrain was telling me yesterday that they got a lot of those mail-in returns pretty quickly, and to them that would indicate possibly that people had already made up their minds on who they're going to vote for. And we'll break down some of these numbers that we were just talking about actually for this runoff. And this is where it all started earlier today. This was when the first batch of the absentee ballots were starting to be processed, and the Ada County elections team working hard here tonight. What we're talking about though, and you guys just touched on it, the ballots issued versus the ballots received. And when I see this number here at the bottom, 85.9%, that's the rate of return, which is pretty encouraging, especially for a runoff. In terms of those ballots issued though, again, 14,578 were issued out to the community. The clerk's office got 12,523 back, again, about 86% there. And a lot of these you can see here were coming up all the way through the month of November. But they really did start getting a lot of those returns the 18th, back over onto the 20th there. a lot of ballots coming back. Now, when you talk about the ballots issued here, you can actually compare past elections like we just were with 2016 or 2015 rather. Now, this blue line you see here, this is us right now in Boise. This is 6,426 ballots that were issued. You can compare that again to just a month ago, 3,328. And if you really want to make a comparison, this yellow line right here, 5,768, that was all of Ada County for their elections a month ago. So not just the city of Boise, everybody in Ada County, that was the total. So there was clearly an interest in making sure you cast a vote here from the community. Another item I was looking at is the in-person early voting ballots cast. Again, right here, this red line, this is what the city of Boise did about a month ago. What we have here tonight, again, a little more than 8,000 people went out in person to cast their ballots. And again, as Dr. Witt just said, we didn't double in size, but 3,000 more people heading to vote in person early, to me, indicates that there's certainly a ton of interest in this. And of course, here is the team early this morning. They were starting to process all those mail-in ballots, the thousands and thousands of them. Again, we're keeping a close eye on everything as the results are going to start trickling in soon. Again, we know probably about 45 minutes ago is when the Ada County Clerk's Office was actually swearing in the poll workers here tonight. As soon as they get through all their business, they can really hit the ground, start running. Of course, the election team, they're working all day to start processing a lot of those mail-in ballots. And Mark, we're really going to start seeing those hopefully filter in here in probably the next 10 minutes. I know I've been keeping my eye on the clock for 8:30. I know about exactly a month ago, 8:30 is when we really started to see those results start rolling. Over in Caldwell, though, Misty makes a great point. There's one polling location. There are a few thousand people that are expected to vote, but those machines are pretty good, and they should really start having the results start moving in fast.
Yeah.
One ballot, one election, 2 cities. You would think that this would be done post-haste.
Oh, it's going to be done pretty quickly. The interesting thing, though, is specifically in Ada County, I can't speak for Caldwell because I wasn't out there yesterday, but the team that needs to come in and work on a runoff night is very similar to the team you would have during the general election. Mm-hmm. You still have to bring in this entire staff. They still have to go meticulously through so many different steps. So yes, there are fewer ballots to count, and it's a simpler process. There's only one page to scan through, but these things take time and they want to be done correctly. So I know a lot of us are excited. We want the results at 8:01, but this is going to take some time. Hopefully not too much time, but I know that the team at the Ada County Clerk's Office is working hard as we speak.
I know 4 candidates who would like to have had this done by 8:01.
Oh, yeah.
I would just like to stop down for a second and just mention we are coming to you live on the World Wide Web. For those of you that are watching us, we appreciate it. We'd love to hear from you. We're also on Facebook Live, and there are some of you that have already written in some comments. And if you guys have something you would like to ask Dr. Stephanie Witt, political science aficionado, professor, jack of all trades at Boise State, Jim Weatherby disciple, yes. All of those things, she would be happy to answer your questions, I'm sure. You're watching Decision 2019, the final night of the election. Joe just mentioned, you mentioned earlier, the swearing in of the deputies before they can start counting those ballots, right. Because a lot of people are saying, we sent those ballots in a week, 2 weeks ago, why aren't they already counted?
Well, statute and good practice has a set of rules about how these things happen, right? The, who can touch the ballot box, who has to be present when you open it, the swearing in of the people who help the county clerk do the counting. So it all has to happen with, by plan.
Right.
And that way you don't have a problem with lost ballots or that some ballots were handled improperly, you hope. And, Phil McGrain's going to do a good job of making sure that election machinery is handled correctly. A couple of thoughts about what you all just said.
Sure.
First, we didn't hear any problems at the polling places today. Usually at an election there's
not enough ballots.
Right, something goes wrong, there's a long line or something breaks or the accessible voting is not working, whatever. Sure. We didn't hear anything about that in either place today, so that's good. Yeah. I'm glad for them.
That's a good start.
Yeah, and I think the early voting is symptomatic of a lot of states trying to loosen the way we do elections a little bit to increase turnout. Mm-hmm. Unlike a lot of other countries, we hold our elections in one day, which happens to be during our work week. for a 12-hour period. And if you can't get away from work, or you can't afford childcare, or you can't, it's snowy or whatever the reason, those kinds of things can keep a person from having their vote count.
Sure.
Oregon has been living with mail-in ballots for a long time. Right. Other states are experimenting with, making it easier to get the early voting done, and I think that's a way to give people a better shot at getting their vote counted.
I just got a text from Misty, and you were asking about those numbers, the ballots. In November, the county clerk just told her that they received 3,290 absentee ballots. Today, for the runoff election, they received 3,418, an increase of 128.
Wow.
That is really telling about how the folks feel about this runoff election, when typically, historically, folks don't turn out in the same numbers that they do in the general.
That's true. But getting the early ballot may be a reflection of, I can't take more time off work. It's 1 week closer to holiday shopping and parties and obligations and things like that. So it may have just been, I know I'm not going to want to go down there, wherever it is, to the polling place and just get the thing done early.
Right.
So one way to make voting hard is to make you do it over and over again. And a runoff is exactly that. You vote in the general, and then 4 weeks later you got to do it again.
Right. Well, I mentioned we've got a lot of you folks watching. Christopher Lucky Stewart said, did he just call it the World Wide Web? I think I did.
I think you did.
Do the kids not say that anymore?
It's the interwebs, I think.
It's the interweb, okay. I see Kelly Goff and Skip Hall watching. I appreciate you guys. Again, if you have anything that you'd like to ask Dr. Witt about, go ahead and send that in. In the meantime, we are still waiting to see and hear the results from today's election. We're assuming about 8:30, you said, Joe?
I'm actually seeing Canyon County has it posted on their website that Caldwell, they'll start actually having results posted at 9 p.m. Okay. I don't know if that's a placeholder on their website. I actually haven't talked with anyone from their office here in the last hour or so. But that would make sense if they were waiting till 9 o'clock to get everything start rolling. Again, with Ada County, we could really start seeing them coming in any moment. I'm looking right now. There's nothing working in so far. It is interesting, though. This is a lot of conversation pieces online tonight and on social media, really over the last month. And both of these situations were situations where you had one-on-one races, and at that point it becomes very polarizing. We talk in Boise that Dave Beater and Lauren McLean they're pretty similar in terms of political beliefs. Of course, you can split hairs at this point of the race and talk about homelessness and all kinds of stuff.
Big issues. There's more of a chasm between them.
But we're really, if you were to ask someone over the last week, you would think that they were polar opposites.
Sure.
You would think, one was at 0, one's at 100. The truth is, these two people are very similar. Yeah. There are areas you can split hairs, and we have seen both races get very contentious over the last month, over the last 2 weeks, and not just in Boise, in Caldwell as well. There was a protest at the city hall. There was signs being put up around the town. Here in Boise, of course, we had the different controversies. Of course, people had dressed up and gone down Harrison Boulevard, Nesta McLean campaign signs, and they dressed up as a homeless encampment, so to speak. Of course, Mayor Beater was addressing concerns that he was part of a Basque mafia. Basically, any storyline you could have created ended up almost happening here over the last month. My only question would be is, at what point, Dr. Witt, would we have to do this again, do a third election? I guess how close would the margin really need to be in both these races?
That I did not even give that a thought.
Oh, no.
I know a lot of people were hoping it didn't go that far.
Well, I guess, unless I'm not real good with math, but one of them has to get a majority, right? There's only two, right? So one of them will get a majority. But if it's very close, within several hundred, or, I'm not, this is a thing where we need to ask Phil McCrane again, but statute says how close it has to be before you can ask for a recount. So what we may end up...
It's in the single-digit percentages.
Yes, and we're not going to see another election unless something...
They would have to have an actual tie. Or I guess would they do maybe a coin flip from there, actually.
That's the coin flip, yeah. So there won't be another election unless, the courthouse burns down in a minute or the election facility, but that's not going to happen. So one of these two will win, but it could be very close. We may have to wait till tomorrow or the next day if it's within a few votes. And I don't know whether to expect that or not. If you look at the results from the November election, McClain was ahead by 15, 16 percentage points, right? So you wouldn't expect it to get that close, but they've both been working very hard. They've been spending a lot of money. They've been doing a lot of groundwork. So, and it's really a question of who shows up today. Who got their voters back out. So
this also costs a lot of money.
It does.
$100,000
in Boise, $30,000 in Canyon County, in Caldwell. That's a lot of money.
It is, and the taxpayers are paying for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for you, in a profession where you are trying to put things in perspective for your students and explain this world of political science that we are in the middle of, how frustrating is it for you to not have straw polls and not be able to say, here's why this candidate is leading in this time, and here's why this candidate is not? How frustrating is that for you as an educator?
Well, in national races, we usually have polling data, so you can
sometimes
say,
it's accurate.
Right, and you can look at past voting and speculate and stuff. We can look at the precinct voting here and kind of piece together what looks like is going to happen, but it's not a big enough place where there are polls being done that the public has access to.
Right.
I don't know whether the campaigns have spent money to get private polling. I assume they do, but so it's not quite like the presidential race where we have all this inside baseball information. So you just have to go with what you can see, you know.
And now that it's after the polls have closed, I can ask you, what do you see?
Well, first of all, I want to say, I see an impressive ground game by both campaigns.
Talking
really,
like a football fanatic.
Yeah,
right?
They're going door to door. They, at my house, I live on the bench. I had at least 2 people come to the door and make sure, did you vote? Did you know how to vote? Do you want me to tell you how to get there? Do you have a ballot? A lot of information coming in. It looks like Joe's getting our attention.
We have our first results in. If we can actually take the big board in the back, guys, we can actually show here. So far, we have about 4,600 ballots counted here in the Boise City mayoral runoff. You can see here, Lauren McClain out in front of Dave Beater by a few thousand votes there. Right now, it's about 70%, 30% split. Again, this is just the preliminary numbers that are starting to come in. It looks like actually these count about 4,600 absentee mail votes as well as early voting at about 8,100 there. So we're really starting to get an idea, I guess, 13,000 votes into this race here. You can see here on this visual map, you see all that blue. Those are precincts where Lauren McClain had the most votes. You can barely see those 2 spots of orange there on the north and the west side of Boise. Again, though, these are preliminary numbers that are just coming in. These are for the absentee mail and early in-person voting. We can report, though, Mark and Dr. Witt, Lauren McClain out front by a few thousand votes to get going. We talked about this at the top of the show, that we knew that there was a lot of ballots that came back pretty quickly from those mail-in ballots, and that might indicate that people had already made up their mind. Another thing we can talk about is how many people got those absentee ballots and how many people showed up for in-person voting. Another graphic I didn't show was the absentee ballot requests from around the world. There are Boise residents that are in other places all across the globe right now that made sure they got their ballots as far as Africa, South America, Australia, the UK, Russia. People are making sure they can be part of this. And again, Mark, these are just coming in. These are their preliminary results. But you can see here, Lauren McClain continues the trend that she started during the November general election on election night 30 days ago, that she came out in front and she actually held that lead the entire night. Of course, we're here tonight because neither McClain nor Dave Beater got 50% plus 1. But these are the early results coming in. McClain, a comfortable lead in terms of those mail-in and in-person early voting.
With 1% of the precincts
tallied.
Those are only the early votes.
These are just the early votes. This is about, I don't know, what is this, about 14,000, and I think this is 9.7% of the vote. So just under 10% of the votes so far, Lauren McClain out in front.
Now, this is part of a ground game strategy, though, to get early ballots to your identified supporters and make sure they know how to fill it out and when to turn it in. And so it's impossible to know exactly what's causing that.
Sure.
Right? But we can speculate that this is part of a really well-developed making sure you get your people to the polls by giving them early access to the polls.
Right. This is pretty much the way it started in November in the general.
It is.
This is, it's almost a carbon copy of what we were saying at about the same time of night, 8:45, and it, as Joe mentioned, stayed that way through the end of the night. How do you think this runoff differs in terms of what they did in their campaigns in the last 3 weeks compared to the 3 weeks in the run-up to the general?
I think it got a lot more nasty. You know, the direct attacks, accusations, each side accusing the other of doing something untoward, you know, with campaign materials or in terms of what they're saying. And so that's not terribly surprising in politics. That's how that goes. But mayoral races are often really boring and tidy. So this is a little bit more animosity than we've seen in recent mayoral elections anyway.
And do you think that could have been sparked? It seemed like Mayor Beater really came out with his teeth glaring in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Could he have seen, as some have speculated, a poll that said, you better start fighting?
Well, he really had nothing to lose. I mean, he would, if we were doing this by a plurality, he would have lost by 15%, right? So my sense is, well, it didn't work being mild-mannered. Let's turn it up and see if we can prey on people's concerns that we can tell them about and see if that works differently. Because whatever it was they were doing prior to the election, it obviously didn't work real well.
Right.
Yeah.
And she decided to take a step back. As you know, we tried to schedule a debate with the two candidates. He agreed. She had never committed to it.
Yeah.
And so we ended up doing taped one-on-ones with them, juxtaposing similar questions. What did you think at the time of that tactic, electing not to debate?
I understand that. I mean, it wasn't as if we didn't get to see them in the debate format. There were many debates, right? Although they included all 6 or 7 of the original candidates, and they did one, right, after the general election was over. So I think she probably felt like everybody has heard everything they're going to say. I suppose if the direction of the voting turns around, we'll know that that was a mistake.
Right.
But with a great lead, and why chance going in front of people again where maybe a more contentious environment might turn out badly for her?
And the McClain campaign, actually, they told me just that. They said, you know, because I asked after we had this whole fiasco of will there be a debate on Channel 7, will there not be a debate on Channel 7, and they were straight up. They said at this point, they said Lauren has debated the mayor several times.
Yeah.
She has said everything she's going to say about the issues. At this point, it becomes redundant. And the campaign told me at the time that they were excited to get back out in the community. They wanted to do that ground game you were talking about. They knocked on thousands of doors, made lots of phone calls, sent lots of messages. It is interesting, though, how that played out, though, I guess 2 weeks ago now, where you had that forum on a Thursday night, the homeless forum, where members of Boise's homeless community were invited to ask questions of both candidates. And then the very next day, Mayor Beater hosted his own homeless forum downtown. He had invited Lauren McClain to come sit in. She is city council president, of course, and of course, his opponent in this race, and she decided to pass on it. It was a very different conversation that we had on Friday than we had on Thursday about the homeless community. So it is very interesting to see how that played out. People are asking, what's really going on behind the scenes? And they say, we can't tell you. We really don't know. We can tell you what they're telling us, though. They decided, the McClain campaign, they didn't want to debate anymore. They participated in the Q&A. And I know some people were really happy with that. Others criticized it. And we'll find out tonight if it really made that big of a difference.
Yeah.
Well, things really kind of separated these candidates when the whole library thing really came to a boil.
Yeah.
And he backed away from that.
Right.
And said, this is an $85 million project that's starting to get out of hand. She accused him of railroading this thing through without a vote of the people, and he really backed away from that. So there were a couple of issues on the campaign trail where she really took a step back and separated the two of them.
Yeah, and that's a thing that he's held against her, right? You were for this till you weren't for it, right? You know, when you change your mind, you are subject to that kind of an accusation, I guess. But I think that in a period of time when the rents are getting so high, the property taxes are getting so high, that people saw these really big ticket projects as inappropriate or inappropriately sized maybe for the community.
Sure.
And because he's been a proponent of the stadium or the sports park, whatever you want to call it, and the library, it's really tagged on him, right? So even though he backed off it, I'm not sure that was enough. People are like, why are we building such an expensive library? Why are we building this big sports park?
Right.
I like the sports park, but people don't like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
She also came pretty hard after him on his pursuit of changing the way the courts, the homeless issue has gone through the courts for well over a decade.
Yeah, this is a terrible issue. Of course, it's a difficult problem to solve. It's in political science we'd call it a wicked problem. It takes a lot of different people coming from a lot of different directions to fix whatever that means, homelessness, right?
Right.
And the issue is, of course, about 10 years ago we had Cooper Court, where many homeless people were camping outside. There are issues of safety. There are issues of hygiene. There are issues for the surrounding businesses. So the city opted at that time to go with a process where they would cite people to remove them from, to break that up. That's been challenged in court. It's making its way up to the Supreme Court.
Right.
A lot of other cities have signed on as friends of the court, with Friends of the Court briefs to join Boise on this because they face similar things.
Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco as examples where they don't cite them.
Right, but
or they don't enforce it.
A lot of cities are thinking that would be a way that we could handle this. And then the counter is, of course, you don't want to criminalize being homeless, right? So there is a compromise that we're living under now, where you have to ensure that there's a bed available before you cite somebody. So you could have gone somewhere, you didn't, so now I'm going to cite you for being, It's contentious. It's not an easy problem to solve, and they have parted ways on that.
She came out pretty strongly in the last week saying, no, I am against camps.
Yes.
I do not think that we should have camps. She just doesn't feel comfortable citing those people, to your point.
Right. I mean, I don't think any city wants there to be a lot of camps where there's no public toilets and there's no safety. That's not a good look for any city. But what you do to solve it is the big question.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe, let us know when you get some more results in. In the meantime, I've got a love fest going on from former students of Dr. Witt, who are...
They're all in the comments on Facebook, and we're also on YouTube right now, so if Facebook's not your favorite, you can comment on YouTube as well.
Dr. Witt rocks from Alex Erickson. We've got a number of your former students. Sabrina Minshaw, she was my advisor at Boise State, highly influenced me. Dr. Witt, hope to see you and your dog at the elementary school this weekend, the bearded guy with the giant German Shepherd.
I know exactly who that is.
She's got a lot of fans out there, Dr. Witt. You're a political star.
She's got a lot of fans out there.
I walk the dog every Saturday at the school.
So now we know where to catch her, right?
Well, if you're just joining us, I'm going to set the stage again. We are live in Ada County, downtown Boise, at the Ada County Elections Office. And we are also live in Caldwell, where we are closely watching that race between John McGee and Evangeline Beechler for the city council there. We'll continue to monitor what's going on, and we'll continue to put the totals and the tallies at the bottom of the screen throughout the evening. And then coming up tonight on the news at 10, we have a full 35 minutes, depending on what happens. Do we know it's going to be over by 10:35? I think that is a question that is still too early to answer, especially given the fact that at 8:45, we still haven't gotten any of the votes tabulated from today.
That's right, and I actually just got a message from our reporter, Misty Inglett, who's reporting from Caldwell tonight, and she tells me that the clerk's office will be counting the votes in 3 batches, absentee early, then today's. They just got the absentee. They haven't gotten the early voting just yet over in Caldwell. If you're just joining us, though, we do have some early results here from Ada County, from Boise. We'll show these up on the full screen here. What you're looking at right now is a lot of blue. In the blue precincts, there's 88 of them. The blue precincts are the areas that Lauren McLean has more votes than Dave Beater. You can see there are 2 very small sections of orange there. So 86 out of the 88 precincts are in favor of Lauren McLean right now in terms of the early voting and the absentee mail voting. You can see here both of these numbers combined. Those are all the people that sent their ballots back in the mail after they requested an absentee ballot, and all the people that showed up to do the early voting in Ada County. They account for, I don't know, let's see, 12,799. That's just under 10% of the total voters in this race. And you can see here early on, Lauren McLean with a comfortable lead there. She's at about 70%, Dave Beater at about 30%, several thousand votes in between them. This is very similar to what we saw a month ago. We saw on election night in November during the general election. We saw Lauren McLean pull out early in front of the entire field, but Dave Beater was there in second. But McLean, she built a big lead early, and really she held on to that the entire night. The question is, tonight though, Mark and Dr. Witt, will she be able to hold on to it? What will the people who actually went to the polls today, will they be having a different mind frame? It's interesting, Dr. Witt, you and I actually talked about this a few weeks ago, that one of the real drivers to the polls for a lot of people were Propositions 1 and 2. A lot of people were really engaged in that race, and a lot of people were also making votes in the mayor's race while they were in the polling location. A lot of them were what I would describe them as protest votes against Mayor Beater. We talked about this earlier. People have a lot of complaints about the city of Boise. Some of them may be directly related to the mayor's office, others not so much. But it is interesting to look at the fact that will people who were out there to vote on the propositions, will they return? Did they go back to the polls today, or did they send in mail-in ballots? We know that a lot of McLean's voters, a lot of people that voted her the first time around, they were very specific on how they felt about those propositions. They were not in favor of the library and stadium projects. So we'll see if they got back out there today to support a mayoral candidate, or if they were just interested in turning down those projects.
Yeah, it's really about which voters show up today, and we can't know that ahead of time. Both candidates will be working to get their voters back to the polls again, but there could be voters who didn't vote the first time who show up this time, right? So you don't know what's on their mind. And there could be people who voted for one of the other candidates, Rebecca Arnold, Brent Coles, who might be motivated to come and vote again, or might think my person lost, I'm out, and they don't show up.
Or may say Rebecca Arnold stood for everything Dave Beater didn't, and so a vote for Lauren McLean is a vote indirectly for Rebecca.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if that is the way they think. She won in nearly every precinct. I mean, there were a number, in a row there where the mayor won, but she really seemed to be victorious across the city. It wasn't like just one part of the city voted for McLean and the other didn't. The precincts that she had a plurality in were all over the city, and so that may be some indication that it's not just about where they live in the city, for example, like a reaction against that.
Well, tonight we're going to sign things off for now, but tonight we're going to be there when
one note
the
for you, Mark.
question is
before we leave, real quick, I just got an update. It looks like, and I'm going to read this right off my phone here, the early voting numbers are in Caldwell. John McGee is ahead of Evangeline Beechler, 60% to 40% about. It looks like right now about 400 votes ahead, and it looks like, again, let's see here, in terms of, I'm trying to do math on the fly here, that's dangerous, about 500 votes in between them, and it looks like they've counted 2,100 votes. So John McGee out, I'd say a little comfortably here, 60 to 40%, and those are the preliminary results that we have coming in from Canyon County. Those are hot off the press for you.
Okay, yeah. Hot off the phone, rather.
Yeah, the phone press.
Yeah.
I guess we don't really print things on our phones.
All right, well, again, tonight we will have the answer to the question on whether citizens of Boise want to see a change in the city's highest office.
And after this, they may want to change in the electoral process, too.
Right. That's a question will be answered at a later date.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we're going to continue to be here for you online, on your KTVB app, and also on the news at 10 coming up in just a little over an hour. One final thing did you have before we sign off?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Well, Dr. Witt will join us again in a little over an hour as we continue with the final night of this election cycle of Decision 19, otherwise known as a tune-up for Decision 2020,
Yes.
coming up in less than a year.
Yeah.
That'll do it for now. We'll see you at 10 o'clock.